she said, I'm not going to run again. Why don't you run? And at that point, I had a busy full-time job. I had kids who were 2 and 5. The wheels were kind of coming off the wagon because my husband was a busy trial lawyer. And I thought, the legislature, we lived in Topeka, so I lived only a mile from the Capitol. The legislature in Kansas is part-time. So while people look at my resume, say, you ran to be governor, and I really ran to go home. We took some major strides on renewable energy. Kansas had lots of wind power, lots of sun power. We also had the 10th highest carbon per capita footprint in the country, all of our coal-fired plants, and we didn't need more power. So we made a determined effort to shift and begin to focus on more renewable resources. I'm really proud of the fact that even though we couldn't get the legislature to pass a mandatory renewable energy standard, we actually got a voluntary agreement with the utility companies and the landowners around wind power. And we now have about a third of Kansas power is delivered by alternative energy. And that feels really good to me.
Own your own brand. And in order to do that, though, I think it goes
Yeah.
maybe left unseen that this could be facilitated by the fact that now these entrepreneurs could access the insurance that they otherwise would be held captive to a larger company. And even though they wanted to be entrepreneurs, even though they wanted to take a risk, the healthcare risk for an individual or an individual with a family was prohibitive. What are your thoughts on that? To me, it was a huge enabler that may be quite invisible.
Well, I think you actually identified a really key part of this. I heard that over and over again. I was kind of the outside, if you will, ambassador for this idea and talking to people. But I remember clearly being in Austin at one point. We did a lot of town halls. We did a lot of involvement with local leaders. And the mayor of Austin, which is, I think, known as one of the thriving, booming cities, whether you're a musician or an artist or a young business owner or a techie, he said, this is the most important piece of legislation that we could have because it's not, a tax incentive. We can do that. People can find money in the market. They can do this. But if they don't have access to health insurance, they can't pursue their dreams. They can't move. They can't be on their own. They're locked into place. mRNA, for instance, years of research went on before finally a vaccine hit with that technique. And
Right.
so I think it also gives some real examples of why you need bench research to be funded, be in the pipeline. There were experiments that didn't work. There were trials and tests that didn't go anywhere. And then suddenly it goes. And so all of them are built on building blocks of some of that research that's gone on for years.
Absolutely. Yes. No, that's so true. And even, more recently, the GLP-1 agonists, that have been very impactful for patients, first in obesity, but in comorbidities like, heart disease
right.
and diabetes. Those have been in the pipeline, for so long, that's why, from early stage, all the way through the process, it's a high risk and high failure rate, to ultimately make it to the products that actually do have transformative impacts on patients.
Well, and I'm sure early on in the NIH research, somebody said, why are we studying bat venom? What
Right.
could that possibly do? What a ridiculous, I could just see it as a highlight of a ridiculous study that's been done. And there we have it. And I think the feedback for people in the private sector who have successfully worked with agencies is this is really a misdirected way to try and save money. It is a dangerous place for the United States because I can guarantee China is waiting to eat our lunch in the United States. They would love to be in the premier position in research and development and in science and in medicine. And if we are handicapping our own efforts in research, if we cut out a private public partnership only works if there's a public piece of that partnership. The private sector cannot step in and fill all the roles that the government filled. So I think that message needs to be delivered as clearly as possible to the members of Congress who have always supported and funded NIH, who have always believed that the FDA was a critical component of our food safety and our drugs and cosmetics and devices. So, as loudly as that message can be delivered and as coherently, I think is really important right now. As you said, it's very much tied to our national security and our national purpose. We saw that with COVID. You know, if you have a health crisis, if you have people who can't go to work, it takes down the economy and it makes our country weaker and more vulnerable. So a healthy America is actually a much stronger and more resilient country.